Welcome to the Energy Commission's electrical wiring program. This is a training on how to fill the electrical installation certificate form C. Just as with other forms, you always need to look out for the electrical wiring program's logo, the seal, and then the serial number. Remember, the serial number is practitioner specific. And what I mean by practitioner specific is that if there's an issue or an issue arises and we want to identify which practitioner did the installation, just with the serial number, the Energy Commission is able to track you, the practitioner, and be able to take you through any disciplinary measures, if any. Now, you are always required to write down the digital address for the installation that you conducted. Now, the Form C in itself is to be used where an installation does not require the provision of an additional circuit. And the Form C itself is in 3 parts. Part 1 is description of minor works. And under description of minor works, you are required to describe the minor works that you actually did. And by that, for instance, if I'm invited to a facility to introduce a new circuit, as a practitioner, you are required to be able to establish that the new circuit you are introducing will not overload the existing circuit. When you've been able to establish that, then you can go ahead to do the installation. Now, if for instance it's a socket outlet, you need to write that maybe an extension of one 13 amps single socket outlet or one twin 13 amp socket outlet, or you were required to install just a ceiling fan. You can indicate an installation of a ceiling fan, or maybe somebody wanted you to increase the amount of, he wants to increase the amount of lighting in an office, in a residential facility or whatever. Immediately you increase that light, you are adding to the existing electrical installation. So we expect you as a practitioner to be able to first of all do an assessment and know that this introduction will not overload the circuit. Address. You are required to state categorically the address of the installation that you worked on. And then you are also required to state the date that the installation began and then the date that you completed. Under Part 2, you are required to indicate the type of earthing system. Remember, there are different types of earthing system. We have the TNC, the TNS, TNCS, and TT. So when you go to the facility, you are required to examine and establish the type of earthing system and take accordingly. You are required to state the method you have put in place to ensure protection of persons against indirect contact. An indirect contact is, example, your refrigerator, for instance, has some metallic part. The external part of the refrigerator is metallic. The external part of your microwave is metallic. So now, that metallic part may become live. Current may find itself flowing around it under fault condition. So you are required to state what measures you have put in place to prevent persons who comes into contact with such an appliance which is faulty from getting electric shock or electrocution. Now, what normally happens is it can either be earthing or provision of residual current devices. So number 3, protective devices for modified circuit. The circuit that you added on, we expect you to state the type of the protective device and the current rating of the protective device. The type could be type C, it could be type B, it could be type D. But then the rating may differ. If it's a socket outlet, for instance, it can be maybe 16 amps or 20 amps. Part 3 is essential tests. And under essential tests, you are required to conduct a series of tests and record the values accordingly. Now, we require you to test for continuity of your earthing conductor, or we require you to test continuity of your circuit protective conductor. And when you test it and the value is satisfactory, all we expect you to do is to take accordingly. Now, insulation resistance. You are required to test insulation resistance between the live conductors and between the live conductors and earth. And when we say live conductors, basically what we mean is live and neutral and live and earth. And then you test between neutral and earth as well. The next test is earth fault loop impedance. Now, when you extend any circuit, what you are doing technically is you are altering the loop impedance path. You will agree with me that the longer a circuit, the higher the resistance. So when you extend a circuit, basically you are altering the loop impedance. So we expect that when you have finished the extension or when the work is done, and remember earth loop impedance is a live test, so when the work is done, we expect you to use your earth loop impedance tester, conduct your earth loop impedance, and then record the value accordingly. There are different values for earth loop impedance for different circuits for different types of protective devices and sizes. So I encourage you to get a copy of the electrical wiring regulation and make it your companion. That way you'll be abreast with various values and some technical information that you require. Now the next is polarity test. With polarity test, you need to use the ohm side of your ohmmeter or ohms side of your multimeter. Now when you have finished conducting your polarity test, we expect the value should be as low as possible. If you get as low value as possible, we require you to take satisfactorily. The next test is that we require you to test your RCD, if any. Now, if there's an RCD in your system, we require you to test for the operating time and then the operating current. Now, with operating time, the standard operating time for residual currents differs for various types and sizes. So as I mentioned earlier, you can always find it in the electrical wiring regulation. For residual current devices, we require that the maximum sensitivity for a final circuit should be 30 milliamps. But then the current rating of the RCD itself will differ depending on the type of circuit you are working on. Part 4 is the final part of Form C, and that is the declaration. Here, you are required to write your name in full. You are also required to indicate on whose behalf you are doing the work. For instance, if you are working on your own or if you are self-employed, you can write self. Or if you are working for a company, you are required to write the name of the company there. You are to write your personal address, you sign here, you write your position. So for instance, if you are working for a company and you are the electrical technician there, or you are an electrical technician, you write a technician. Here, you are expected to put your stamp, sign the signature part of the stamp, and then date it accordingly. In summary, anytime you are invited to make an addition to an existing installation that does not require the introduction of a new circuit, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, you are to add a socket, you are always required to issue a Form C. And on Form C, you are expected to indicate the actual work that you did, the location of the facility that you worked on, and then the dates that the installation was completed. You are also required to conduct a series of tests and then record your values accordingly. Finally, you are expected to declare, and that is done by writing your name, writing your address, putting your stamp on the form, and then signing it. This brings us to the end of our training on how to fill the Form C. Till we come your way next time, bye-bye.